Dishonored, a popular stealth series with a touch of black magic and a heavy Victorian aesthetic. In the games, the Empire of the Isles is in the midst of their own industrial revolution, which was powered by whales. As someone interested in history, both in real life and in the form of video game lore, I found the similarities between the real-life industrial revolution of Europe and the United States, and that of the Empire in the Isles in Dishonored to be very interesting, and thought that on top of being able to share some fun lore about one of my favorite game series, I could also teach you guys about the topic of whaling, which might help contextualize and give more depth to the amazing world that Arcane Studios built to their games. Without further ado, let's begin. In real life, the Industrial Revolution was a period in Europe and the US between about 1760 and 1840 where technology made a massive leap to drastically increase production power. From handmade products to machines, chemical manufacturing, iron production, development of machine tools, and the use of steam and water power to revolutionize manufacturing and give birth to the factory system. This surge in production made more products than ever more available to the general public, causing a massive increase in population that only further fueled these developments. And while we could talk about all these new processes and products for hours in a whole series of videos, I'm just going to stick with that short list of advancements so I can properly focus on the topic of this video. Now, Jeff, you may say, what do all these fancy new gizmos have to do with whaling? And the answer to that, my friends, is just about everything. You see, whales are what made the Industrial Revolution possible. And this is because of the chief product of whales, which is whale oil. Whale oil in real life is what lubricated the machines of the Industrial Revolution, long before we had discovered or commercially produced other types of lubricating oils or petroleum. And as a quick aside here, I'd like to mention that the discovery of these other oils and how to commercially produce them, along with the increasing scarcity and cost of whaling expeditions, is thought to have saved whales from straight-up extinction. Yes, whale oil was a great lubricant. It had a low viscosity, flowing more easily than olive oil, and perhaps most different from the Dishonored universe, was very stable. It came in two basic varieties: oil from baleen or right whales, and sperm oil or oil from toothed whales, which are the type of whales we see in Dishonored. The only real difference between the two is that sperm oil was more waxy, having a higher fat content and different chemistry. It was more highly valued than regular whale oil and was in high demand. Much like in real life, whale oil was also the powering force of the Industrial Revolution for the people of the Empire of the Isles in Dishonored. However, in this universe, it's much more literal. In Dishonored, whale oil is a refined fuel source that's incredibly unstable and highly volatile. It powers everything from streetlights to clockwork soldiers, and this material allows Gristle and the other states of the Empire to advance in the revolution. The use of whale oil as a fuel source, and as a kickstarter of the Isles in their industrial revolution, was one of what I like to call the three great minds of the Empire. His name is Esmond Roseborough, a natural philosopher whose ideas were discredited and ignored throughout the Isles. And so in the early 1800s, living in poverty near the whaling center of Dunwall, he noticed that the waste product of the whales, their oil, was being used to stoke fires by the workers. He immediately recognized the potential of the substance as a fuel, and was propelled from obscurity to high standing among the Isles for his discovery of refined whale oil and his many inventions, such as powered lighting, motorized ships, and rail cars. Kickstarting the Industrial Revolution. He met a young Anton Sokolov, the second of the three great minds of the Empire, in the 1820s. Sokolov talked with Roseborough about his own ideas for new technologies, ultimately producing the weaponry used and abused in the Isles by the monarchy to control the populace. Guilty and ashamed over the ultimate legacy of his invention, Esmond Roseborough committed suicide in his office in 1834, just a year before the rat plague of Dunwall. Nevertheless, whaling and the need for whale oil continued to increase along and with its applications. This brings us to our next subject, the practice of whaling itself. In real life, whaling had many different advances that led to different sorts of eras in whaling. Primitive whaling focused solely on collecting whales for their meat, and whales were brought to shore for processing. Early commercial whaling, which we'll be focusing on, was conducted on the open sea, and whales were tethered to the boat for processing. In the early commercial whaling days, massive ships, larger than a typical merchant ship by several times, for the sake of storage space, were common for voyages, which would last an average duration of just under 4 years per voyage in the later years, which was much longer than at the beginning of the era due to declining whale populations. This meant that in addition to the crew, captains often brought their families with them on the whaling vessels. Each vessel had smaller boats on it that were used for the actual hunting of the whales. When a whale was spotted, someone would shout, "There she blows!" and the activity would begin. Each smaller boat was manned with 5 to 7 men, and they would try to get as close as possible to the whale and harpoon it. The harpoons were attached to ropes that would anchor into the whale's body non-lethally, at which point the men manning the hunting boats would hold on while the whale tired itself out trying to disengage the harpoons. Once the whale was thoroughly exhausted, it would be killed with a lance, piercing it through the lungs or heart. The whale carcass would float and was towed to the whaler vessel and affixed to the right side of the ship, at which point processing would begin. Men would work from platforms on the side of the boat. I'm sorry, I lost my place. On either walking on small platforms or walking on the whale carcass themselves with spiked shoes. They began by ripping off strips of blubber and baleen, which was collected and had its own market and uses, which were brought on board to be rendered via tryworks, which were a large pair of cast iron pots surrounded by a water-filled brick structure that sat near the forward hatch of the ship and was about 6 by 9 feet in size. The blubber was boiled in the tryworks, separating the oil from the meat for collection and loading into barrels, which were then stored below deck. Whaling life was difficult, disgusting, and dangerous. Food supplies were difficult to upkeep. Low-ranking ship members were treated poorly. And it was common for people to die on voyages in various ways. For example, being crushed by large, heavy strips of whale meat after slipping on the oil and blood-slicked decks. Being scalded alive by boiling oil when an errant wave caused the tryworks to spill. Or being drowned under a flipped hunting boat if a whale fought too hard. After rendering the whale, the ship was thoroughly cleaned, but it was impossible to get out the horrid smell of rancid whale. It was said that a ship downwind of a whaling vessel could smell it long before it saw it. And if you need a more specific example of the potential horrors of whaling, you can look up The Voyage of the Essex, which was the real-life inspiration for Moby Dick. I recommend Ruining History. They had a really good video on it, really easy to digest. So in the Dishonored universe, we don't have quite as much information about general whaling life, but I will talk to you about what we do have here. To describe some of the basic process of collecting whale oil in the Dishonored universe, I will read an excerpt from a manual on harvesting whale oil that is found in the Knife of Dunwall DLC. In earlier years, the methods to reclaim whale oil from blubber were inefficient and dangerous. The official technique required the raw blubber to be sealed in pressurized cookers, which forced the volatile fluid out of the tissues and into collection tanks. The refined oil was then cooled rapidly while the pressure was reduced, and if the synchronization of these processes was not perfect, it was possible for the oil to release all of its energy in a devastating explosion. This is believed to be the cause of the historic Fullerton Whalehouse explosion that cost over 150 lives. Modern industrial trends have reduced the dangers of collection while increasing the output from each creature. Greaves Refinery made the first steps in live collection, aided by the research of the Academy of Natural Philosophy. In the wake of the plague, Greaves has suspended operations, and this process is now applied at the Rothwild slaughterhouse. No longer is the whale blubber removed and harvested, but instead the very mechanism that creates the oil inside the whale is stimulated, and the resulting oil is drained away and stored. This results in a more stable raw oil that is easier to refine, with more tanks harvested from a single whale. End quote. This live collection process was developed by none other than Anton Sokolov himself, and seems pretty cruel, which fits into the general feel of the Dishonored series as a dark and gritty world. The Rothwild slaughterhouse itself is known to use indentured employees and even just straight-up prisoners to do their labor. We don't have many direct sources for knowing how life aboard whaling vessels is in Dishonored, but I imagine it's largely similar to how it is in real life, which is difficult, disgusting, and dangerous. The only difference with real life being how they spend large, boring amounts of downtime in what products they produce. In real life, products produced by whaling include whale meat, whale oil, sperm oil, spermaceti, ambergris, baleen, and scrimshaws. And as we have already discussed, the whale oils were rendered from whale meat and used largely for industrial uses. Spermaceti, however, let me go back a few images, sorry. Here we go. Check these out. So spermaceti was a wax that is liquid at body temperature and is produced within the spermaceti organ inside the sperm whale's head. Upon tethering the whale, the head would have a large hole cut into it, to the spermaceti organ, and buckets would be used to bail out large amounts of the substance. A large whale could produce up to 500 gallons of the stuff. The main uses of spermaceti were ointments, cosmetic creams, fine wax candles, pomades, and textile finishing. And later into the Industrial Revolution, it was also used as a mechanical lubricant along with the normal whale oils. The spermaceti would usually be stored over the winter, where it would partially congeal in the cold. Once it had partially congealed, it was processed through wool and pressed down, and the liquid oil that came out of it was collected and sold at a premium price as sperm oil that was cold resistant. The leftover wax was then processed and sold as spermaceti wax during the summer. Ambergris, another product of sperm whales, this being solidified intestinal slurry, was a much rarer compound that was used in the production of perfumes, which I unfortunately forgot to get a picture of. At the time, it was unknown that ambergris was even a whale product, as it was usually found adrift at sea or washed up on shore. There are some accounts of some Asian sailors who would go after sperm whales to try to get the ambergris, but a lot of them theorized that it was stuff that was eaten by the whales and not actually produced inside of it. So, at least they knew where to look for it, I guess. At the time... whoops, I almost just reread that whole sentence. Sorry, this video is kind of a mess. This is the first time I've, done something like this. Let's see. Alright, here we go. Baleen. Baleen, the term for whalebone, as used by the general public at the time, was used for a variety of textile applications, and for the art of scrimshaw. So there are actually two different types of what we would call baleen. The proper term for baleen is the bristle structure inside of a whale's mouth that it uses to filter feed. But the layman typically uses baleen to also describe whale bone. So things like hoop skirts or things that needed a somewhat stiff yet somewhat flexible material would typically use the actual bristly baleen, and then a lot of stuff would use whale bone proper, including scrimshaw. Scrimshaw was an art form practiced largely by bored sailors, but also, tribal peoples and other stuff, other people around the world. But as far as it relates to our video, bored sailors, who would make elaborate engravings onto pieces of whalebone. And they were often used to depict a variety of scenes, including nautical, whaling, romantic, and botanical imagery. Now, in the Dishonored universe, whaling produces meat, whale oil, sperm oil, Spermaceti. Oh, wait, I'm reading the wrong list again. Let's try that again. It produces meat, whale oil, scrimshaw, bone charms, and runes. So, whales in the Dishonored universe are magical creatures linked with the void. As such, most of their products, barring whale meat and simple scrimshaws, are magic in nature. Bone charms are also crafted by sailors aboard ships, along with many among the general populace who also can craft these bone charms. Sorry, I'm kind of flipping back and forth between the script and trying to get a drink of water. They provide a magical benefit to the wearer, such as boosting physical abilities, supernatural powers, or providing various other benefits. Here is an excerpt from a book titled Bone Charms in the Dishonored games that gives a general description / history of them. Bone Charms. A sailor's blessing, they say. The carving itself is a practice from long back, passed from father to son, old man Salt to Greenhorn still getting his sea legs beneath him. In the old times, men cut into the tusks of ice seals and into the arm-long fangs of bears that roamed the isles north of Tivia. Once the whale trade began, the practitioners went to engraving the bones of these great beasts, rendering charms that sing in the night and grant some small boon to a man's vigor or a defense against pregnancy. End quote. Currently in the series, the Abbey of the Everyman has banned heretical objects, like bone charms or other such magic artifacts linked to the void and the outsider. Another product crafted from the bones of whales are runes. And runes are objects that strengthen the powers of anyone marked by the outsider, serving as an upgrade system for the powers in-game. Runes have been carved since ancient times, like a long time, and served as objects of worship, kind of, for the outsider, and as magical artifacts linked directly to the void through his mark, which you see on screen here. And so now we finally come to our last topic. Thank God, my voice is getting really tired. You'd think that, talking for, X amount of time straight wouldn't be that bad. And, it doesn't feel that bad if you're, just, presenting a topic to a class. But for some reason, recording it as, a video is nah, dude. Your voice, not working. It's kind of a pain. Anyway, I'm going to take another sip of water here. Hopefully that doesn't come through the mic. I should probably just mute next time. I wasn't thinking. So, the future of whaling in Dishonored. Much like in real life, the populations in Dishonored, of whales that is, have fallen considerably, resulting in an empire-wide decree to ration whale oil by Empress Emily Caldwin after the events of Dishonored 2. And I couldn't find a good picture of the posters, but there's posters saying, rationing whale oil in effect all over the game in Death of the Outsider. Obviously, the practice cannot be sustained, But what will happen to the Empire and to the whales? So, in Dishonored 2, it's revealed that Karnaca has wind turbines, which you can see here, that can supply power in the place of whale oil. We don't really know anything about how it was invented, but I'm willing to wager that the person I consider to be the third of the three great minds of the Empire had a hand in it. Kirin Jendosh. So, Kirin Jendosh was a brilliant inventor who is said to have the potential to provide even greater leaps in technology than Anton Sokolov. Among his inventions are various ingenious locks and security devices like the Dolores Michaels elevator safe in Death of the Outsider, or the lock for Aramis Stilton's manor in Dishonored 2. He also invented the Clockwork Soldiers. Sorry, I lost my place again. Which is a highly complex and powerful sentry-type weapon that functions on a sort of primitive computer. I say primitive, but it's a very advanced piece of machinery. He lives in a clockwork mansion of his own construction, and clearly had the genius to potentially help the Empire move past the need for whale oil. Unfortunately, during the events of Dishonored 2, he was an enemy, and so he is dispatched, lethally or non-lethally, by the main character, and canonically ends up being exposed to an intense electroshock therapy that stunts his intellectual capacity for life, turning him into a moron. Now, how will the Empire develop with the increasing scarcity of whale oil and the lack of constant wind in most areas to provide wind turbine power? It's possible that another great inventor will come along and provide the answer, or maybe their industrial revolution will just straight up collapse, which kind of would fit in with the theme of Dishonored series as a kind of a dark thing to happen. Or perhaps they will find an answer for their plight on the mysterious continent of Pandyssia, which I think is pretty likely because there have been accounts of like land-going whales that you can read about in the games, like in some of the lore that have been seen in the Pandyssian continent. I think that a visit to Pandyssia is long overdue for the Dishonored series. I don't know what they would do there, but I feel like you could make a really interesting story out of the fauna and flora of the place. Although I'm not sure if it would be able to work with the same type of gameplay. Anyways, I and many others are looking forward to seeing the future of the Empire of the Isles. So, that will be all. Alright, so thanks for watching this video. I wanted to do something different from my normal unscripted garbage that I produce, and thought that would be fun to combine two of really interesting topics, Dishonored and whaling. So, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. I'm sorry it was kind of clumsily done. This is actually, believe it or not, like one of like 20 takes of this video I did, and my voice is like dying right now. So, you know, you hate to see it, I guess. In the future, if I do more videos like this, which I'm not sure if I'll do any more videos like this, but I'm not going to say it's totally off the table. So if you want to see more of this type of video, or like to see a variety of admittedly infrequent content, then go ahead, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you want, so you don't forget me in 6 months whenever I upload my next video, or whenever it will be that I do it. But I don't know if I'll do more videos like this, but I promise that if I do another scripted video like this, I'll put a lot more care into how I present it. I found that this was a very big learning experience for me. I did a lot of research. I spent like 6 hours writing the script and like getting all the images and stuff I wanted. So I'm a little bit upset about kind of bungling the execution here, but I've taken so many takes of this video that I don't think my voice will hold up to very many more. And by the time I perfect it and perfect going through the slides, I think that I don't know that my voice will be very happy with me by the end of that. So I'm just gonna leave it here. So either, regardless of the quality of the execution here, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Jeff out.